We're a mimetic species. We understand one another. We can see the point of what people are doing. We can recognize actions and see the idea behind them. Now, those ideas are representations, emulative representations that come from the fact that we can echo what other people are doing with our own selves. But we have a second representational system. And we have it because we are, as a species, food sharers. We work together. In order to do that, we have to have shared intentions and shared perceptions. We need to understand what one another are doing, and we need to be able to coordinate our activities. Sharing perception is absolutely basic to this, and you can tell it is by looking at our eyes. We have eyes like targets that focus on things and make it absolutely clear what we're attending to. If we were individual selfish creatures, it would be to our advantage to conceal our intentions, but we don't. We make them plain because we want to share them. Babies are born. The first thing they look at, if it's possible, is other people's eyes. They're drawn to it from the first day of birth. They start looking around for the eyes, because that's going to be the key for them in acquiring culture and joining in the society to which they belong. So we share intentions and we share attitudes. And it's not just the eyes, it's our innate ability to point and to understand pointing. Again, something that no other animal seems to have. We do it as an extension of the eye to share attention. We can just basically point, but if the situation is more complicated, we can actually point to things that are out of sight. You know, it's a universal language of gestures. You know, that way, bit to the left. You know, there's a big thing. We can, if we need to, any two human beings can manage to, after a fashion, to communicate through gestures. But it's a fairly inefficient system, and we must imagine that our ancestors developed it into quite complicated codes of indication for pointing out where hazards were and where, you know, food sources were and this kind of thing, so that they could coordinate their activities. So you can get a long way through gestures and through pointing, but the trouble with pointing is that it will never in itself become representation. The act of pointing and the thing pointed to define one another. You know, you see that gesture, you don't know what it is until you know what's on the other end. It's the intentional object and the intentional action, as they say, define one another. However good a system of pointing is, however sophisticated, on its own, it's not going to be very useful because you don't always know what people need to have pointed out to them. In other words, you need a way of asking questions. You know, you say, Annie, which tells them you want to know where Annie is. Where's Annie? The other person will then make the appropriate pointing gesture by the river or behind the hill or whatever. And you have the basis there for a question answering routine. You know, they're needing this all the time. So you tend to build up a routine so that anybody can ask for the position of anything in an efficient way. And the next step then again is for them, that general routine, to become amalgamated, so that when you're telling somebody something, you put it in a combined question answer form. You just say, Annie is by the river. You've got the question, the subject, the answer, the predicate, the noun phrase, the verb phrase, and you put them together and you produce a structured indication, except that it's gone beyond an indication, because the structure of the indication, which is now a statement, corresponds to the structure of the world that it's about. On one hand, you've got a whole set of words for objects and places. On the other side, you've got the actual objects and places. And the relationship between the words and the relationship between the things and the world correspond to one another. That's all you need to make a representational system. So our question answering routine for where things are, the locational system, has become a verbal representational system. It only deals with where things are, but it's very good for that. And when you have a routine like that, there's no reason why you shouldn't develop others, like who's that? And you have a set of ways of defining relationships between people. You know, you've got the names of all the people, and you've got brother, sister, mother, and you've got all the kinship relations. So the who question develops a verbal representational system for genealogy, for relationships, or maybe it's got tribal words in, or in other words, such systems are universal in all cultures. And you go on and you have how questions for describing what people are doing, etc. A whole bunch of these verbal representational systems. They behave in a different way to the old question answering routines that were all about one person directly understanding another. You've got these statements. Once they're made, they can just pass around from one person can just tell the statement to another. The statements of fact can acquire a life of their own. They're no longer tied to the context of one person explaining something to another. They're just facts that pass around impersonally. They've been, in a sense, liberated from the body. And in this liberated state, the different verbal representational systems can start to, as it were, evolve on their own. A more efficient way of saying something will last longer than a clumsy way of saying something. And if you can make a statement that combines a lot of information together, people are more likely to pass it on than a statement that hasn't got much in it. And so, over the centuries, over the thousands of years probably, you develop a complex grammar which amalgamates all these different things, these different representational systems, and turns them into tenses and all the complex rules that grammar has. Some people talk as though language was just created in an instant. Human beings acquired speech. My guess is that it took them tens of thousands of years to get from the first pointing to the kind of complex grammars that we have today, that language grew up with human beings and with culture. And even today, actually, languages are not all equal. Some of them have far more complex grammars and there is the idea that there is a universal grammar that is somehow hardwired into us, popular for a long time, has now been fairly definitively disproved. Languages have nothing in common with one another, except perhaps some kind of basic subject-predicate form that you might get from questions and answers. They all have some sort of a backbone, but how other things are done, no, it's all different. So there we have it. Two systems of representation now, symbolic language and the direct emulative understanding of one person by another. When you combine these two together, then you have human sapiens, which is what I will describe in the next talk.